And a very good morning, respected heads of the schools, faculty members from various schools in Siliguri, Darjeeling, Kurseong, Kalimpong, and Meerut. The managing trustee of Endeavour Global School and the management team, friends and well-wishers of Endeavour Global School, it gives me an immense pleasure to welcome you all to today's Motivational Talk program. Thank you all for joining us today despite of your busy schedule. And given this opportunity to introduce such an eminent personality, Mr. Deepak Ramola, who is the key speaker of today's talk program, I find myself fortunate to welcome you and introduce you today. A very warm welcome, Mr. Deepak Ramola and Ms. Mehak Sharma, if she is there. I sincerely thank you, Mr. Deepak Ramola, for accepting our invitation. And it really means a lot for us that without a second thought, you said yes to our invitation. Thank you so much, Mr. Deepak Ramola. Though a budding school in Siliguri, we at Endeavour Global School always look for opportunities to gather experiences, share our experiences and knowledge from each other. And this is one of its kind that we have organized today, and we know that this is a very difficult situation, and thus we want to motivate ourselves, our fellow colleagues, as well as people from different sectors. So this is the right moment and the right opportunity for us. Now moving on to introduce Mr. Deepak Ramola. He's a man with so many talents. I would call him a man with various hats. Mr. Deepak Ramola is a poet, wisdom historian, public speaker, educator, author, content creator, and a lyricist. Deepak Ramola is the founder and artistic director of Project Fuel, a two-time TED Talk speaker, and UN Action Plan executor. He serves as the Finance Ambassador of UNESCO MGIEP. Forwarding the understanding of his life lessons of the women of Maasai tribe to young girls in Afghanistan and to sex workers of Kamakapura, learnings from earthquake survivors in Nepal to Syrian refugees in Europe, Deepak is a new age storyteller and artist. He and his team of artists have painted the world's first village of life lessons. Deepak's methodology has been recognized as world's top 100 innovations in education by Finland-based organization 100, and has also been adopted by the Education Board of Antwerp in Belgium, Nepal, and Pittsburgh, USA. A celebrated lyricist in Hindi cinema, his songs have been voiced by Mr. Amitabh Bachchan, Mr. Farhan Akhtar, Rekha Bhardwaj, amongst others. His first collection of Hindi poetry, titled Itna To Main Samajh Gaya Hoon, received the prestigious Young Writer Award in 2020 at Jaipur Literature Festival. His latest book, 50 Toughest Questions of Life, has gone into a reprint 2 weeks after its release. This is just a short introductory note about Mr. Deepak Ramola, and it's such an honor to introduce you. So now, without much delay, I would like to hand over the session to Mr. Deepak Ramola so that everybody can hear you live and get some experiences, share some experiences from you, and learn a lot of things from you. Thank you so much. Over to you, Mr. Deepak.
Thank you so much, Janet ma'am. First of all, I don't know about you all, but I love listening to my introduction. It's the only time you can actually see what all you've done. You know, one is so busy from one project to another that there are very little moments of pause. And whenever, there is an introduction, I listen very keenly, and maybe my mother too, if she's in the audience. Parents love those kind of things. In another world, I would have loved to be in person with all of you and share these learnings. But nonetheless, in the times we are in the COVID world, I'm very glad and very, very humbled by the invitation by Nandita ma'am and Janet ma'am to be able to share some of my experiences with all of you. I mean, have been an educator since I was 17 years old, and a lot of you are elder to me. But in many ways, because I started young, I had a rare insight into how we learn, how we develop, we think. And when we talk about education in particular, everybody in the world agrees that being wise is the highest pinnacle of human cognition. Yet, in our school systems, rarely do we teach children to be wise. We teach them to be intelligent and clever and smart and expertised in something, knowledgeable. But how does one become wise? Given the fact that everybody still believes that wisdom is the highest point to achieve. The reasons are many. One is that it is difficult to contain wisdom into one box. It has so many different components in its construct. A person who's wise will be creative, but a creative person will not necessarily be wise. A person who is, who thinks logically or practically decides something cannot be wise, but a wise person will always have a practical and a successful outcome to his logic or her logic. So these were the questions I grew up with. And even before I can tell you why I asked myself these questions since a young age of 14, I want to show you and take you around the world with me. I know you all are sitting in the Northeast, but I wanted to take this Sunday morning to not just talk, but take you around with me to places that I have been and introduce you to those people from my lens and their wisdom. The wisdom I share is not my alone. It is of the 400,000 people I've taught over the last 12 years. So yes, welcome to meeting, some of those people from the 4 lakh that I've had a chance to meet. In 2016, I was watching the news like most people and reading about the Syrian refugee crisis and how millions of people from Syria and obviously other parts of the world as well, like Sudan and Eritrea, were being forced, because of the violence and all the atrocities, to leave their homes and migrate to the US. But the borders were more easily accessible to these people in Europe. So they would come towards, countries like Sweden, Germany, Netherlands, France, Hungary. And so I decided to go on a 90-day tour and understand what does a person learn when their houses have been bombed and they have to risk their life, sit in a boat, travel through the Mediterranean Ocean for days and arrive, in a country whose name they've not even heard. So I spent 90 days living in these refugee camps around the world. And I had a chance to meet some incredible people. I was invited to teach at prison cells in Amsterdam where these refugees were housed. And there was this, entire understanding that there wasn't enough space in many places in Europe, particularly in places like Amsterdam, such a crowded city. So they put them in these empty, barracks of prison housing. Now imagine you're first a refugee, anyways living with the trauma of having to, leave your country and your language and your people, and then having to stay in a prison cell with bland food. तो कई सारे सवाल थे इन लोगों के मन में भी, मेरे मन में भी. When I went to teach, everybody in this prison cell was very, very accommodating, I would say, and welcoming. मैं कुछ गेम खेलता था तो they were very respectful of that. They would participate, they would give answers. There was one guy who just did not cooperate. I would ask him to play a game, he would say, I'm not interested. I would ask him to smile, he would say, I'm not interested. So after a point, I got a little, agitated, and I said, what is your problem? Tell me, what is your problem? And he said, you don't know my story. So I said, I have all the time. I've come all the way from India to listen to stories. Tell me your story. So he starts to tell me that I was, a very successful businessman in Syria. And once the war started, I had to shut down my business, sell it, give all the money to a smuggler. I sat in this boat. This is where my boat stopped, and this is how I came. And as he was telling all of these little details, another refugee in the room looked at us and said, no way, you were on that boat? I was on that boat too. To which the angry refugee says, I cannot believe you were on that boat. You could not have been on that boat. So now I ask him, why have you such difficult time accepting it? So he says, this man who claims to be on my boat never complains about the food, serves as a translator for young children, and he participates in workshops such as yours. I cannot believe that I got off the same boat and became this angry person, and he got off the same boat and became this happy, cooperative person. And that life lesson since has never left me. Because no matter what decision you take in life, we all are getting off a boat. हम सब एक नाव से उतर रहे हैं और अब ये हम पे निर्भर करता है कि do we want to be the happy refugee or the angry refugee? And this guy had spent 6 months of his time being so angry and frustrated and miserable that he didn't even make an effort to learn the language, because of which he was not given the citizenship, because they said, how are you going to integrate in the society? So you lose a lot of time in moving forward when all you're doing is looking backwards, is what he taught me. And in that sense, when I was on the tour, it was quite an interesting experience that, I was learning from all of these adult refugees. I was meeting some of the best politicians, NGOs.
Miss Saviguru, can you please turn off your mic?
You'll have to, put off your audio, but welcome to Thank you.
Thank you.
So I was meeting all these amazing people, learning from them, but there was something amiss. I was like the media, or like the best of politicians and the best of news agencies, looking at only adults for their experience of the refugee crisis. But one of the biggest stakeholders in this conversations were children. And nobody was asking the children, how do you feel about so many millions of people coming into your country, whose children are going to be your classmates, are going to be your playmates, are going to be your neighbors. So I was invited to teach at the International School of Stockholm in Sweden. And I remember, telling the coordinator, I'm going to talk about refugee life lessons. And she was very scandalized. She said, no, I know nothing about refugees. I don't know if that's a good idea to share with them right now. Why don't you do your usual thing? I said, I'm on a tour to collect and pass on refugee wisdom. It will be unfair if I don't touch upon that subject. So we decided that I'm going to teach for 15 to 20 minutes, and it can go up to an hour. And if it goes well, then I can continue and we can assimilate based on the children's reaction. I was supposed to teach an hour or two. My class ended up being extended to 4.5 hours, where I only taught life lessons of the refugees. And at the end of the class, to be able to share with the school management that my class was safe and sound and these kids had a perspective, I asked them to write a letter to the refugee whose story they most liked. And you'll be amazed. These were kids from age 8 to 12. This is one of the letters, out of the 60 kids in the class. He writes, "Dear refugee, I want to welcome you. We love and accept you for who you are. Here there is hope and many possibilities. Sincerely, Spencer Peterson, age 12. My life lesson is," he says, "no matter where, even in the darkest cave, there is hope." That's a 12-year-old boy whose management decided for him that he knows nothing about the refugee crisis. There were other kids in the class. I remember a girl who wrote, "Dear refugee, hold on for only 10 years. In 10 years, I will be the policy maker and things will be different. So I promise you, stay hopeful and things will change." A lot of times when we are learning, and as I was saying earlier, when we talk about creating an environment where we or our children can be wise, we don't think that they have any inherent knowledge. For so long in our learning process, we have treated children as empty vessels in which we have to pour information. For the last 12 years of my career, one of the most amazing aspects has been to teach them as your colleagues, and then to see, can they live up to that responsibility? Education has been participative. We as teachers, we as educators and staff, हमारी जिम्मेदारी है कि हम उसे एक तरीके से कोऑपरेटिव और कोलैबोरेटिव बनाएं, ताकि हर बच्चे को ये लगे that I am not empty, I have something to say. कुछ ज्ञान है, कुछ विवेक है जिसे मैं बांट सकता हूँ, और जिसके सहारे मैं वो कॉन्सेप्ट्स, वो सारी जो बातें हैं सीख सकता हूँ, जिनसे शायद मुझे थोड़ी समझने में दिक्कत आती है. तो one of the things that I want to be able to emphasize, especially in this pandemic learning, I'm doing a beautiful research with my colleagues at UNESCO about education after the COVID world. And one reason, one way in which teachers can reduce their burden is when they don't feel the need ki we have to fill this child with information. When they feel the child knows something already without you, and all you have to do is propel it. There is a lot of energy spent in pushing. There is less in pulling. There is less spent in pushing, and that will allow them to discover their own understanding of the world and maybe inform you. I learn so much from my students. For example, when I was teaching in Belgium, and I was working with the Education Board of Antwerp on making education democratic. How do you make education democratic? When the school gardener and the school principal and the school student all have a stakeholdership, all have a power, a chance, an opportunity to contribute to the learning environment of their school or their community. So I asked young kids to share their learnings for their teachers. And I remember there was, a teacher who had recently been separated from his spouse. And a 10-year-old Emma wrote, when I was 3-4 years old, my mom and dad broke up. My dad was a horrible person. I don't want to talk about that. I was all the time crying, but now I am better. My mom too. I never give up. I learned to never give up. And when she gave me this letter to share with the teacher, I was amazed that we don't even think a 10-year-old or a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old pays attention to the world around and is able to condense the learning. हम उस सारे अनुभवों को, उन सारे एक्सपीरियंसेस को जो हमारे आसपास होते हैं, उनका सृजन करते हैं, not just as adults but even as children, more so today, because you have friends to please, you have social media, you have so many other distractions जिन्होंने आप पर एक तरीके से एक फिल्टर चढ़ाया है to be the best. So we process things more than the adults give us credit for. This is a 6-year-old boy named Abdul Rahman. I asked 6-year-old Abdul, what has life taught you? And without even battling an eyelid, he told me, Deepak, before you learn how to ride a bike, learn where the brakes are. Imagine that as a life lesson. It's incredible how children can give you a perspective, can allow you to see things that you don't see. And all of you, I'm sure, see this in your classrooms daily. What I'm pushing towards is to create an environment in a formal context where the wisdom of the child is celebrated. When I was in school, I was heavily bullied to the point that I didn't want to go to school again in 7th grade. Everybody made fun of my voice. I didn't have friends till, a much later grade in life. And I felt severely bullied. And my English teacher, I remember one day I was crying. She took me out of the classroom and she said, why are you crying? And I said, everybody bullies me. And she said, किस चीज का मजाक उड़ाते हैं? I said, मेरी आवाज का. They say it sounds like a girl or a kid. And she said, do you like your voice? I said, I don't know. She said, well, if you woke up tomorrow morning and you couldn't speak, would you be okay with that? I said, not at all. I want to speak. I want to be a debater. And she said, well, so we are agreed. You like your voice. Now the only thing you have to do is own your voice, own your story, and nobody can make you feel bad if you like something for yourself. It's not their concern. I can tell you that in March of that year till today, that one life lesson, own your story, has changed the course of my life. Not only did I become the school debater and the head boy after that conversation, but I also became a public speaker and a teacher. I also became a performing poet and I became an artist. Just that one lesson from my English teacher, Mrs. Pragati Kapoor, liberated me for my entire life, because I thought, aha, if I like myself, I don't have to so much bother about who else likes me. And actually, to my surprise, when I started liking myself, when people said, oh, you sound like this or you sound like that, I said, I agree with you. I don't sound the most manly in the room, but I have stories to share. And if you're willing to listen to them, I can guarantee you a lot of information and a lot of entertainment. And people leaned in instead of leaning out, because I embraced who I was and how I sounded or what I knew, both in terms of content and in terms of voice structure. It is in our very being, when we accept our stories, that we empower other people. I mean, I don't do anything differently. In fact, Kumar Mangalam Birla once met me at a conference, and he said, I cannot believe you have lived your entire life on the concept that everybody has a life lesson. It's such a simple idea. I said, yes, but not enough people practice it. So it gives a chance to people like me to be able to turn it into more professional work. With all the resources in the world, many people don't own up their stories. But as teachers and educators, as people in the educational realm, it becomes more important, because a child is not just learning from you from the subject point of view. They are learning from you as a person. I don't remember meeting any school teacher of mine anywhere and saying, this teacher helped me get 99 out of 100 in my English or my science paper. But I do pause and say, my Hindi teacher, Mrs. Shraddha Bakshi taught me that a smile will open more doors for you than your serious face will. And whenever I enter a meeting, I try to make sure that I'm consciously smiling for the people so that they know I'm accessible. Those are the things that people borrow. Every single child in the world, including yourself, I think adults are just overgrown children, needs one positive story. My English teacher did that for me. The question becomes, how many children can we provide that story for? Every single child, if can graduate from school with one positive story about themselves, I'm telling you, they will never forget you. I haven't forgotten my teachers, and I know my students haven't forgotten me. To give you a very small example, I was in Punjab one time teaching, in Jalandhar, and there was a boy with a spoilt eye. When he was growing up, a ball had hit his eye and he could not see from one of his eyes. And when I was doing the introduction in the class the first time, kids started laughing, and that boy became so furious, they started calling him names. And I remember feeling the pain of the boy, because I had been bullied in a similar way. So I took him to this main stage. I write about this in my book, 50 Toughest Questions as well. That I asked the boy, do you play a sport? And he said, yes, I play badminton. I said, do you come to school on your own? He said, yes. I asked him, do you do your homework? He said, yes. I said, do you paint in your art class? He said, yes. And then I asked the same 12, 15 questions to the class. I said, do you all play? Do you all come to school? And all of them said yes. So I turned to the boy and I said, who's more talented, you or them? You do everything they do with just one eye. And I turned to the class and I said, you should be so grateful that he doesn't make you feel less talented, because he is more capable in this situation. And that is the day the parents of the child called me that night, that the child was ready to forgive the guy who had hit his eye with the ball. And he was going to speak to him first time in 4 years. And more so, when I tracked the progress of the child for next 2 years, he was more confident, his grades improved, just because of shift in one story, that he was more talented. And I think that power that we all hold is insane, because it allows us to bring our grandmothers, to bring our spouses, bring our children, bring our relatives and our friends and their knowledge. And we become the vessels to pass that information. Let me show you a few more examples of what I mean. I've, been with world communities and tribes and have come to the conclusion that every person knows something that you do not know. And when you start looking at people as books and as libraries and walking, talking repository of wisdom, they become interesting to you. I have never been bored anywhere in the world. And I'm the worst person to sit on a flight with, because you have nowhere to escape and I will ask you too many questions about your life lessons. So whenever I book a flight, my office or my family says, God bless the person who sits next to you. Their entire biography is going to be written by the end of this flight. But it also tells to me and reveals to me that there are so many conversations we need to encourage ourselves and people around us, even your families, to have. Uh, for example, how did I start all of this work? Why do I collect people's wisdom? Why do I become a wisdom historian and teach? It's because of my mother. She was pulled out of school in grade 5 by her grandmother, and her grandmother didn't want her to study with boys or study at all. And my mother growing up would tell me that story कि मैं स्कूल नहीं गई और मुझे कभी मौका नहीं मिला, मेरे पास वो resources नहीं थे. मुझे हमेशा ये लगता था कि ये बहुत अच्छी कहानी है. You know how in reality shows you see before the performer comes to sing and dance, you have this AV video about how difficult their life is. I thought my mother is telling a similar empathetic sob story to convince my sister and I to get good marks. But when I asked her mother, my nani, कि क्या ये सच्ची कहानी है? So my nani said yes, कि your mother was the eldest of 8 children and we had to pull out of her of school because the grandmother didn't allow. I walked up to my mother and I said, how do you know so much then? इतना सारा ज्ञान कैसे है आपको? And my mother's simple and honest answer was, life is my classroom. I learn simply by living. And I don't take for granted what I see and absorb from other people. I use that to raise you. That was when I was 14 years old, almost a week after this picture was taken. And I thought to myself, if my mother can simply learn from living, that means everyone who's living is learning something. Where can I find this information? So I went to the master of all masters. Can you guess? Google. And I typed life lessons of my best friend. And I didn't find anything. So I typed his father, who was a little famous in the army, whose name came in newspapers. It wasn't there. And then I did a few more people who I knew in my circle were popular, but not that popular. And it wasn't there. I realized that the world was focused around being rich and famous to make sure that you left a legacy. And since I was 14 years old, I wanted to change that. I wanted my mother's amazing knowledge on how to handle relatives to go to as many people in the world. Or to another girl in Afghanistan who was going to be 17 and 18 and married off, or 13 and 14 and leave school. I wanted to cross-pollinate knowledge. And my mother became the inspiration for the entire organization that I lead today. From the classes in Nepal, this is a class that Janet ma'am used to be part of in Nepal, and where we met for the first time. It is incredible that children and people across the world can teach you so many things. There's a girl in this class that you see on the screen who said to me, 5 years old, and she said to me, Deepak, my life lesson is, when you're done using the jar, remember to close the lid. And that life lesson actually during the Nepal earthquake made a psychiatrist from a Kathmandu hospital cry, because it is a life lesson about having a balance. When you're done with one thing, be done with it. From women in Kamatipura to farmers in Uttarakhand, I have had a chance to look at humanity much like you all, to understand what can I gain. And as teachers, that is one of the biggest mistakes we make. We think we only have to pass on knowledge. We think we don't have to have fun. And that is the second problem. We don't play with wisdom, whether it is ours or somebody else's. When you start to have fun, when you start to push an envelope, that is when you will be able to say, this is how it is done, but what if I could change it? I'll give you a quick example. In Uttarakhand, where I live, the challenge of migration is a very big problem. A lot of villages have become ghost villages because people have left their old homes in the village and moved to the cities for better economic, medical, livelihood facilities. I've adopted one such village in 2017 called Sword. It is a 600-year-old village. And out of the 200 families, only 12 families are left behind. And I traced all the 200 families around the world. I interviewed them. I took their stories and memories of the village. And I went with my team and we painted their houses, hand painted their houses with those stories. And this has become the first village of life lessons in the world. These stories became so powerful that there was a tourist influxion to the point where people started opening shops, and people even bought back their houses in the village, which they had sold off to people in Delhi or Maharashtra or all across India. They started buying back their ancestral houses and building upon them. But when I was doing this project for the first time and I went to many people, they said, "You're going to paint a village by your hands? An abandoned ghost village? That's impossible. No, nobody has that kind of time, effort, or money to be able to do it." But I was able to fundraise it, do this project, and I learned a very important lesson. When people tell you you can't do something, do it twice, and the second time take a lot of pictures, because the first time you'll be busy, just doing the work. So after I finished this village, I was invited to another village in the Pindhari Glacier in Uttarakhand. It is the last village on the glacier. No roads, no electricity, no network, no internet. And I went again and I painted stories of the village and the community onto the walls with the village. Luckily, this was not a ghost village. But a lot of tourists would come here for a night and then go to the glacier for their trek. Since we painted the village as an open-air gallery, people started staying back for 2 days, 3 days, which included livelihood, which ensured that people didn't have to migrate to the cities. So there is a trickle-down effect for every creative idea that you employ across the world. And it created so many conversations with village children about their culture, their history, their identity. I wanted to tell you also about, challenging your limits. As people, we become confident and comfortable in what we do. This is a guy named Philani Delada. He's a beggar in Johannesburg, South Africa. He's a beggar, but he does not beg. What does he do? He collects books, reads them, and then if you meet him on that traffic light in Johannesburg, South Africa, he will ask you, hey, have you read The Alchemist? And if you say, no, I haven't, then he will say, let me tell you, it's the story of a young shepherd who goes in hunt of a treasure, and he builds the story to the point where you want to know, does he find the treasure or not? And then he will say, well, to find the climax, you have to buy the book. And that way, he makes his earning by getting people curious about a story and then selling them the book. So famous has his approach become that he now has a foundation by the name Pavement Bookworm, and libraries across Johannesburg, South Africa for other beggars to borrow, read, and pass on information. And for that to happen, when I was reading Philani's story, something was very clear. You have to accept where you are. You have to own your story. For example, he said, I'm a beggar. I have no qualms about stopping people on the street, and I love to read. How can I combine these two and push it forward to present an idea? In many ways, Philani's stories, teaches us about learning from our own circumstances, our environments. And this is not just for your students in schools. This is for your children too. I have never come across, children who were inspiring and whose parents were educators if the educator parent, only was a good educator at school and not at home. Not in the sense of that you help your child with the tuition, but you help your child with the ways of life, the values of life that they will see beyond the textbooks. And what do I mean by that? Most of the parents, especially women, I would like to address this to. You ask them, tell me what is most important to you, or tell me what's your biggest dream. They'll say, I want my children to do well, or I want my in-laws to be fine. I want my husband to be safe. Most people's dreams start with their family. And when you tell that to a young child growing up, he or she will feel by default then to think for themselves is probably not the popular thing, is not a good thing. But from my personal experience, ever since we were young, my mother, whenever she was asked, आपका सबसे बड़ा सपना क्या है? She would say, मुझे अपना नाम साइन करना जानना है. I want to be able to read a book for myself. And yeah, my children should do well, my husband should be safe, all the normal things. My grandmother, who was married at 30, had 8 children, lives in the mountains, I asked her 2 months ago, I said, what is your dream? She said, my dream is to sell my vegetables in the main market of the village after the lockdown is lifted, because I've really missed that. And I was able to see that a person who has a dream for themselves is able to inspire everybody else who's struggling to find one. Because then you are telling the person, cultivate your own happiness, find your own joy, and then allow others to find their way into it with you. Especially in the COVID times, we've seen the toll of mental health stress. All of us have to manage school, teach through a screen, manage family. We have a joke here with the teachers I teach here in Dehradun कि पीछे चावल जल रहे हैं और यहाँ बच्चे के नंबर कम आ रहे हैं. So एक तरफ कुआं एक तरफ खाई. How do you manage? Because at least when you were in school, you were not worried about the pressure cooker having given 3 CTs and you have a class to finish, right? So in those environments, I have realized humor plays a huge part. Don't hide your lives from your children. Share them with them so that they can see you as a true human being and see that you are also building. We as educators feel the pressure to show ourselves as absolutely perfect. But in my research with more than 20,000 teachers across the world, I've realized that when you become vulnerable, you actually empower your children. And let me show you a very powerful example. And maybe after COVID, I can come to Siliguri and Kalimpong and all those regions, and we can do this project together in your campus. One of the things that I realized that hampered in the last decade since I started teaching was the relationship between teachers and students. Now a child, when they can Google Einstein talking about his own theories on a podcast, why is the physics teacher important? Why is the English teacher important? You can Google it and every Google will tell you everything. The teacher is important because the teacher is not a textbook. The teacher is not a theory. The teacher is not just a role. The teacher is a role model. And with social media, that distinction of seeing the teacher as a role model faded, even for myself. And I felt that the celebration of the teacher-student relationship has to be at the forefront. So I created this project called Out of Syllabus, where we create a wisdom squad in a school with children from different classes. We train them into 21st century skills of data documentation, filmmaking, interviewing, questioning, data designing. And then the project is the Wisdom Club students interview every single academic and non-academic staff of their campus. So teachers who teach them, to the school bus driver, to the school gardener. And they handle everything from the sound to the camera to the questions. When all of those lessons have been documented on film, we design them in form of these beautiful art exhibits with the picture of the teacher, their life lesson and their story. And they grace the entire school campus. We call this wisdom corridors. And you know what has happened in the past few years since these wisdom corridors came to be in places like Belgium, in Dehradun, in Mumbai, or now I'm doing a project in Pittsburgh. The beauty of this is 2 things. One, your children start to see you more accessible. Imagine an entire wall in the school with just stories and solutions of real people. And whenever a child feels overwhelmed or anxious, he or she doesn't have to go to just one person and overburden the school counselor. But they can go and see who in this story wall, in this wisdom corridor, comes closest to understanding my story and can provide me a perspective and a solution. The relationship between children and teachers has improved multifold because now teachers don't feel like I have to always pretend to be the perfect person. I can tell you, this is, a lot of kids actually were able to share their grief in the pandemic with the wisdom corridor stories of the teachers who they knew had lost a parents growing up. So the teachers who said, I lost my mother when I was 6-year-old and I had to take care of the house, were now able to guide and have those conversations during the pandemic when kids lost their parents to COVID. So that kind of a bridge, these little solutions have in my learning experience proved कि आप जितना एक्सपेरिमेंट करेंगे, जितना बांटेंगे, सीखेंगे, शेयर करेंगे, उतनी ही नई चीजें आप खुद के लिए डिस्कवर करेंगे. Last three things I want to share with you are not from the presentation or the pictures, but my own hacks on how to maintain hope during a pandemic. The first is call your cheerleaders before you call your critiques. कि जो आपको आपका रिव्यू करते हैं, आपका डेविल्स एडवोकेट प्ले करते हैं, उन लोगों को फोन मत कीजिए. उनको कीजिए जो कहते हैं क्या आइडिया सोचा है, या व्हाट आर यू थिंकिंग, और टेल मी मोर. This includes both for school and home. Don't call relatives who will question your decisions. Call the ones who will ask you, अरे वाह ये कैसे सोचा, और बताओ इसके बारे में. और जब वो बातचीत होगी, भले ही आपका वो आइडिया, वो सोच, वो एग्जीक्यूशन तक ना पहुंचे, you will still be able to derive joy out of the thing कि आपने ये बात सोची और किसी के साथ शेयर की. Most people make the mistake कि वो हमेशा उस इंसान को सबसे पहले फोन करते हैं जो बताता है कि ये तो बिल्कुल पॉसिबल नहीं है. You are going to fail. I have survived and saved my hope in the last 12 years by first calling people who are like, Deepak, we love you for thinking this. At least they make you feel good. Then you can call 10 people who will review it and say, sorry, this is a blah idea, this is going to fail. It's okay, you can handle that. So call your cheerleaders before you call your critiques. Second, try to relate with a sense of humor. अगर आप दुनिया में हर चीज से offend होंगे, तो you are going to live with a lot of pain and guilt. But if you learn to laugh at things people say, the way they review, the way they behave, you will have so much bandwidth. एक बड़ी खूबसूरत तरीके से किसी शायर ने मुझसे कहा था कि हर रिश्ते में अगर गुंजाइश रखो तो बड़ी से बड़ी बात के लिए जगह बन जाती है. And that is true for our lives too. If we keep space, we learn to accommodate people's opinions, their thoughts, and you will learn to laugh and be more relaxed. I create content, तो आप you can imagine social media पर हर इंसान का एक opinion होता है आपके लिए. So when I put my videos out, there is one time किसी ने मेरे वीडियो में लिखा था your nose looks like a dead rat, and I was so offended. I was so offended because I woke up my sister at 12:30 in the night when I read the comment. I said, get up, and she woke up and she's like, what happened? And I said, do you think my nose looks like a dead rat? And she said, I cannot believe you're not laughing about this, you're taking this seriously. And I said, how do I laugh about it? And she said, imagine, of all the things you're saying in that video, somebody first had the time to see how you look, then think about your, one part of your face, which is your nose, then think which reptile or animal does your nose, resonate with or replicate with, and then had the time to tell that to you on a public platform in a comment section that your nose looks like a dead rat. She said, there is nothing more funny than that somebody has spent almost 1-2 hours of their time on your nose. So and ever since I realized that humor is a huge part of, in many ways dealing with these questions and these learnings. And the last thing that I wish to share with all of you is in many ways a very simple but very, very meaningful thing to understand is try to find your happiness. And try to use your school, your conversation with your family, with your children, of what will give you joy. And offer people that opportunity. As educators, we forget that we also have to replenish our sources of joy. We can't just giving. We have to also be willing to take. And there is no guilt, and there should be no ashamed, in asking for that. I tell my students a lot of days, today I'm feeling very low on energy. Does anybody have a good, story to start the class with? And somebody will tell me about, their mamaji and one funny thing or a folk tale from their culture. And it will open up a dialogue to start the mood of the class where I can be encouraged. I have been so many times in classrooms when I've told my students, I'm very tired today from all that I was doing yesterday. Can you motivate me? And you will see that children do so many things to teach you and variate you and see you as a person. So Don't be ever, guilty of sharing with people what can make you happy. When children ask you, "How are you, ma'am?" just don't say, "Fine, good, thank you," and you. That is an automated robotic response. No person in the world can be good, fine, thank you, and you all the days, 365 days, you know. And people, children can see through it. They can see through that you're doing that technique, which is called the blind man technique, that you do as a repulse reflex action what has to be the right answer, not the truthful answer. So take a moment to tell them, I've had today a very heavy day, or I have a very busy day ahead and I'm trying to find time. So I would say, do not uh, put your happiness on hold, negotiate for it. You don't have to fight for it, negotiate for it. And in many ways, you'll be able to learn and practice and share things that will bring you joy. Um, in, in, uh, in our Vedas, there is a word called Brahmand. Do you know the word Brahmand? Most translations of the world say Brahmand is a universe, but that's not true. Brahmand is actually the space in which the universe exists. So they say that Lord Brahma, before he could create the universe, he had to create the space in which the universe could exist. That's why you have so many stars bursting, you have black holes shrinking and absorbing and becoming into all of these different celestial bodies. Having space is the first way to creating anything meaningful. So in your relationships, in your homes, in your schools, first create the space. Don't just create the idea or the child intelligence or the child's progress. Create the space in which the child can progress without you as well. And that space is the hardest to create and the most meaningful to attain. So those are the things that have helped me over time in life to understand, to learn from these many different people and scenarios and cultures. And in many ways have allowed me to fail, enjoy my failure gloriously, and beautiful stories. And Mr. Praveen Pradhan might not remember me, but sir, I actually met you when I came almost 6 years ago to teach in Kalimpong. And I wrote to you and I said, sir, I would like to teach. I think Mrs. Peacock was then there. And I came to you and I said, sir, I am in Kalimpong on a holiday and I would like to teach for a day. And you gave me class 12th and you gave me class 10th, I believe. And while we were walking from the classroom to the main gate, I asked you something. I said, sir, what is the most important thing that you think, allowed you? And you said, we should keep having conversations. Good conversations, create good room to have for you to grow. I mean, I'm sure you don't remember me, but 6 years after that conversation, I remember that because when I left our meeting, I actually sat at Kalimpong's, one of the shops in the main market, and I, sat and had a conversation with one of the persons, and he I was able to encourage myself basically to have that conversation because you said conversations give people chances to know more. So I mean, I don't know if you remember, but it was a wonderful time. And you people like Janet ma'am, Nandita ma'am are prime examples of the ideas that I'm sharing today. It is with people like you, I borrow it and I bring back. So we all become each other's alarm clocks at times. But in all totality, I would end by saying that create space for your own growth and everybody around you will grow by default. All right. Thank you. And we can open up to questions. I think I've taken my time. I had about 45-50 minutes. So thank you for listening so patiently to all the stories.
Thank you so much, Mr. Deepak Ramola. Now we would like to open, we'll have 2 or 3 speakers from from the participants who would like to give some feedback about the session today? It's open to the participants now.
Good morning, Janet ma'am.
Good morning.
Good morning, Nandita ma'am. Everybody out there. Uh, I would love to say about this session, if if you allow me to speak to that. Hello? Janet ma'am, am I audible?
Gitu ma'am, we are losing
Yes,
you
go
in your
ahead, go
connection.
ahead.
Yes, we can hear you.
You can hear me?
Yes, yes, now.
Okay, great. First of all, I would really thank a big thank you to Endeavour Global School for organizing such a beautiful session. Today I'm feeling so great to be a part of this school, and a very big thank you to Mr. Deepak Ramola ji for organizing beautiful kind of inspirational session. And I really got to know that every life has a story. Yeah, it's so beautiful whether it's a 5-year-old child, or a 50-year-old man or a woman. Every life has their own story. So that is something which really hits me. And I'm sure this goes throughout my life. And I would love to tell my story also to everybody. And there were like few points which you said, like don't for someone who will question your idea or your points. It's always to call someone who will like say कि वाह क्या idea है. So always call your cheerleader. So it's like I'm really going to apply this in my life. And I would just end with that thank you so much, school and Mr. Deepak Ramola ji for organizing such things. And I love to be a part of this program. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gitu ma'am. Anybody from the participants?
Good afternoon, Mr. Ramola. My
Good
name is Mark Anthony. I'm the coordinator of the junior school for Himali Boarding School, Kurseong. At the very onset, let me extend my greetings on behalf of the director, Mr. Robbie Subba, the principals of both the schools, the team here at Himali Boarding School, and also at Select. Okay, I find myself very privileged to be a part of this online session, and it was very, very illuminating. Illuminating in the sense because we got so much to take back from the session and also to learn from life and the experiences that you have shared. And sometimes after hearing you, we find ourselves, there's so much we could do in our little space, in our arena, when we are dealing with children's lives and their formation. It's very true. Life is a journey, and how beautiful it is up to one's perception. Just like that experience you shared, about those two refugees getting off the same boat, and both had different perceptions. Everybody has a child, hidden in himself or herself, waiting to tell his or her story, waiting to hear other people's stories, and empathetically correlate his or his story with those stories. Thank you very much. It was very, very enriching, this session, and there's so many takeaways from here. And would love to be a part of the session, many more sessions like this. And I would like to thank the management of Endeavour School and Ms. Janit for organizing this enriching session. So thank you and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you so much, Mr. Captain Mark Anthony. Now, anybody else? If anybody else would like to speak?
Or if anybody has any question as well, feel free to
Any
ask.
questions?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
It was nice listening to you, Mr. Ramola.
Thank you.
I think it was a long time back that you visited Dr. Graham's homes, and I don't remember the event, the days when you visited here. But when you say it was here during Mrs. Peacock's time, I was in the headmaster. I wasn't the headmaster.
Yeah.
She must have asked me to take you to some of the classes.
Yes. Yeah.
So nice to know that. And we did have an interesting session right now. I'm happy that Mrs. Nandita Gurung invited us to this session, and we had lots to learn. And from what you shared just now, I feel it's the English teachers and the vernacular teachers who are very lucky, because they get to know lots from the children, lots about the children, from the composition that they read, the essays that they ask them to write, because we get to read only what they write, what we teach from our subject, from the books.
True.
Actually get to know the children very well, their background and everything, and be a lot of help to them. But and as you said, every life has a lesson. Whose life do you think will have the maximum? Those who are successful or those who have not been successful? Everybody will have.
Yes, true. And that's the good part about wisdom, sir. It is very democratic. The rich have as much as the poor, and the famous have as many as the infamous. Wisdom is equally divided for those who want to cultivate it. So you are very right.
Yes. So I would like to thank Mrs. Nandita Gurung and the Endeavour group for organizing this session for all of us. I'm sure all of us have had something to learn today, even at this age, at the fag end when I'm about to retire. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Deepak Ramola ji.
Ji.
I'm Ms. Bhashwati from Himali Boarding School Select. I'm representing my school. So what you said today in the session was something very incredible. I learned a lot of things. I am in this profession since 3 years. I try to interact with my students in a way that I don't want to create any boundaries between me and my student. I try to keep that transparency, and that really helps a lot when they open up to me about their problems, their daily struggles, and there are students who really talk about it. And it's very, I learn a lot of things from them as well. And even when sometimes when I am not in a good mood or, having some issues with life, I feel really good when I take a class. I don't know, this is something really helps me. Whenever I don't feel good about myself, I just take a class and focus on that, and it's very relieving. So I want to ask you a question, sir.
Sure, ma'am.
You are a very motivating person, but there are certain times when even you are low on energy. So what motivates you to keep on going, or what is that thing that that keeps you positive?
Thank you. I mean, that's the challenge of being called a motivational speaker. I am very wary of that, because then by default you have to motivate people. So all the pressure is on you. So a lot of times when I go to teach, I say, please call me a speaker. Motivation shall or shall not happen, depending on the audience. But thank you for that question. It's a valid one. No, absolutely. On my low days, I think a bunch of things. One is that I think I try to call up people I like, try to spend time with them. But actually, let me tell you a bigger secret. I have something called the first aid box for the soul. On my Gmail folder, I have all the videos that I like. Whenever you listen to a song, you're like, this is such a nice song. I can listen to it many times. So when a song does that to me, I save that. I have 21 quotes that I read that I like. There are a couple of videos that I like to watch. There's a list of 11 people I would like to call. Whenever I'm having a low day, I start by reading those 11 quotes. I go to the 15 or 17 songs. If that doesn't help, I watch the 7 or 5 videos. Then if that doesn't help, I call up the first person from the list of 11. And by the time that I call the third person, I'm already feeling better because I've spent an hour with things I like. So I encourage everybody to make their own first aid box for the soul. When something inspires you, make a note of it, save it somewhere, and keep returning to it when you don't find yourself, fully motivated. That's one. And second is do nothing. There is a lot of pressure in today's generation to be productive all the time. When I am feeling bad, I do nothing, like really nothing, not even touching the phone. Be bored. And hopefully in that boredom, you will find peace because your mind is not running into 10 different directions. So, I think those two things have been very, very helpful, Basuti ma'am, for me to, figure out a way. The first aid box for the soul really helps. It propels you to the direction of something good.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing your first aid box. We'll all try to find our soul's first aid box too. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Deepak Ramola ji. It was such an uplifting experience. Leave aside motivational, exhilarating. All of us need. I started it by saying that all of us need to be pushed. All of us need to be uplifted, and whatever helps us do that. And today you have helped us so much by uplifting our souls. I keep motivating my children, and this is something that I've told my own children and my school children. I keep telling them, when you get up in the morning, jump out of bed and say, "Oh, beautiful day. Thank you, God, for everything." And the rest of the day will fall into place as it will. But that moment when you step off the bed with a zing and with the hope that everything will fall into place is really, really important to perk your day. So that's very, very important. And, Endeavour Global School, we are a very small school, but we have got a very, very large heart. And we have got a wonderful trustee and founder who always pushes us to go beyond boundaries. And that's why when you talk about pushing envelopes or pushing boundaries, our school motto is beyond horizons. And we keep telling the children that, you can go beyond. This you have reached, now go beyond. You have reached that, now go beyond. So it's a never-ending process, the movement forward. And that's so very important. And especially in these last 2 years, we have noticed that we really need a lot of support. We really need a lot of impetus. It's very easy to stagnate if you wish to, and there are so many ways to go forward, and we are trying many different things to leave our footprints in the sand for eternity. That's such a difficult thing to say, but
yeah, I congratulate you all, and it's amazing.
Yes, and that is what all of us are trying to do, I think, as human beings, and maybe that's the reason our species has survived so much. We're always making an attempt. So I would really like to thank you for just, giving us this opportunity. I mean, we constantly feel that, no, we can't ask him, he'll be too busy, or this person will not do it for such a small school like ours. But like I said, we have a huge heart, and Janet showed us that. She said, "No, ma'am, we'll speak to him." And we went ahead and see how lucky we've been, and twice lucky because you've promised us some more sessions. Yeah. So I'm so very grateful for this, and on behalf of everyone, I know my family, EGS, all the spectators who have joined in have enjoyed, because your stories of wisdom resonates with each one of us. We have not been able to put it in words or do it so eloquently like you, but all of us have stories that we have learned from our parents, our grandparents, our children. But you have put it in such a good perspective and made us all realize that we are also a library of stories that we can share with everyone around us. So thank you for giving us that lesson today. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for watching.
And I have a homework for everyone. Today at dinner table, ask your loved ones what their life lesson is. Ask your wives and husbands and children and grandparents, what has life taught you? And that might be the philosophy they leave behind for you to protect and you to take forward. So ask your loved ones what their life lesson is. You will be very surprised, I can tell you. And thank you, Janet ma'am, again for taking the initiative and coordinating so much of this with my team. And thank you, Nandita ma'am, and everybody who joined in. All the best, everybody. Hope to see you in person.
Yes. Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
it's really been an honor, and so much thank you to you.
Thank you. All right. Have a great weekend.